In a quiet town on the outskirts of Ohio, two brothers grew up under the same roof but carried very different hearts within their chests. The elder brother, Daniel Carter, was a quiet soul, patient and hard-working. He found joy in fixing things, whether it was a broken bicycle chain, a squeaky door, or the family's old Chevy truck. People in the neighborhood often said Daniel had hands of gold, because whatever he touched seemed to come back to life. The younger brother, Ethan Carter, was sharp-minded, ambitious, and clever with words. He had the kind of charm that could win people over instantly. While Daniel spent his teenage years in the garage learning how engines breathed, Ethan was out in the town, talking to people, learning the tricks of business and persuasion. Their father, George Carter, who owned a few acres of farmland and a modest house, often said, "Daniel will keep the land running, but Ethan will make it grow." When their father passed away suddenly from a heart attack, the family's world shifted. Daniel was only 22 at the time, and Ethan had just turned 19. Their mother, who had always been frail, relied on the boys to keep the family afloat. George's will wasn't written in detail. It only said that his property and assets should stay within the family. That vague statement became the seed of conflict. Ethan, quick with numbers and even quicker with lawyers, convinced their mother that it would be better if the property was signed entirely under his name. He argued that Daniel was more interested in machines than money, that he himself could protect the property and multiply its value. Daniel, too simple-hearted and unwilling to argue, quietly stepped aside. "Don't worry, brother," Ethan had said, placing a hand on Daniel's shoulder. "You'll always have a place here. You can keep working on your garage projects while I take care of the business side." Daniel only nodded. In his heart he felt a sting, but he loved his brother too much to fight. Over the next year, Ethan sold off parts of the farmland and invested in small businesses, restaurants, car dealerships, and real estate. His wealth began to grow quickly, and people in town started calling him a rising star. Daniel, on the other hand, rented a small garage space near Main Street and began working as a mechanic. He fixed cars, tuned engines, and earned just enough to get by. Yet even in his modest life, Daniel carried a spark that Ethan didn't see. Late at night, after fixing customers' vehicles, Daniel would stay in his garage, sketching out ideas on scrap paper, tinkering with carburetors, and testing ways to make engines run smoother. He didn't care about becoming rich. He just wanted to create something that mattered. What Daniel didn't know was that his late-night experiments would soon change his destiny and also shake the very foundation of Ethan's growing empire. Ethan's rise was fast and dazzling. Within 3 years, he owned 2 restaurants, a small chain of used car dealerships, and even had shares in a construction company. He dressed in tailored suits, drove shiny new cars, and was often seen with local politicians and businessmen. To the town, Ethan was the perfect image of success. Daniel, meanwhile, wore oil-stained shirts and worked long hours at his garage. People trusted him because he was honest. He never charged more than the work was worth, and he treated every customer's car as if it were his own. Still, his earnings were modest, barely enough to pay rent and buy parts. At family gatherings, Ethan would sometimes tease Daniel in front of others. "Still working on those old engines, huh? You should come work for me, big brother. I'll pay you more than you'll ever make fixing junk cars." Daniel would just smile and reply softly, "I'm happy where I am, Ethan. My hands are made for this work." But behind his quiet smile there was a fire burning. Every night, Daniel returned to his little garage, pulling out a notebook filled with sketches and formulas. He had an idea, something bold. He believed he could design a fuel efficiency device that could reduce gas consumption in cars by nearly 20%. He didn't have investors, labs, or fancy machines. What he had were his tools, his stubborn determination, and a dream. While Daniel worked in silence, Ethan's world started to show cracks. His businesses expanded too quickly, and his investments weren't always wise. One of his restaurants failed. The used car market dipped, leaving him with more vehicles than buyers. But Ethan didn't slow down. He borrowed money from banks and investors, convinced he could turn it all around. One evening, after a particularly rough day at the garage, Daniel walked past Ethan's new mansion. Through the window he could see a party in full swing, champagne glasses, laughter, and the shine of expensive chandeliers. For a brief moment, Daniel felt a pang of regret. He remembered the farm, their father's simple wisdom, and how different things could have been if he had fought for his share. But then he looked at the grease on his hands and thought, "This is who I am. And maybe, just maybe, I'll build something that no one can take away from me. That same night, he stayed in the garage until dawn, tinkering with a prototype. The device was rough, made from spare parts and scrap metal. But when he tested it on an old Chevy, the results were astonishing. The engine ran smoother, the fuel lasted longer. Daniel's heart raced. He knew he was onto something big. He whispered to himself, "This is it. This is the beginning." Little did Daniel know, while he was building his future in silence, Ethan's empire was slowly collapsing under the weight of debt and poor decisions. And soon, their worlds would collide again. This time not as brothers sharing a home, but as men standing on opposite ends of fate. The following weeks became a blur of experiments for Daniel. Every spare moment outside his repair work was poured into refining the prototype. He bought second-hand parts, welded metal pieces together, and tested variations. Many nights ended in failure, leaks in the system, engines stalling or parts breaking apart under pressure. But Daniel never gave up. Each failure only made him more determined. His notebook grew thick with sketches, equations, and notes. He treated every mistake as a stepping stone toward success. One evening, after closing the garage, he installed the device into an old Ford pickup. He turned the key, the engine roared to life, and he let it run. Daniel timed the fuel consumption carefully. Hours later, the results were clear. The truck was running far more efficiently than it ever had before. Daniel leaned against the hood, his chest rising and falling as a smile spread across his face. It works. It actually works. He knew he couldn't keep this to himself anymore. If the device could be perfected, it had the potential to revolutionize the auto industry. Word began to spread quietly around town. Customers who visited his garage noticed the strange contraption attached to some cars. Some laughed it off, calling it Daniel's crazy toy, but others took interest, especially those who struggled with rising gas prices. One truck driver swore his fuel bills had dropped significantly after Daniel installed a test version of the device. Meanwhile, Ethan's empire was crumbling faster than he could patch it up. His second restaurant closed. Investors pulled out of a failing real estate project. The banks were circling, demanding payments he couldn't make. Yet Ethan still carried himself like a king, hiding the cracks beneath an expensive smile. One afternoon, fate crossed their paths. Ethan drove his luxury SUV into Daniel's garage. The vehicle had engine trouble, and though Ethan had dozens of mechanics at his disposal, he came to Daniel. Perhaps it was pride, or perhaps it was a quiet recognition that his brother's hands still worked magic. Daniel looked up from his work, wiping grease off his palms. "Didn't expect to see you here," he said softly. Ethan smirked. Even a king's chariot breaks down sometimes. As Daniel inspected the car, Ethan noticed the prototype device sitting on a workbench. He picked it up, frowning. "What's this? Some kind of toy?" Daniel hesitated for a moment, then replied, "It's something I've been working on. A fuel-saving device. Still in testing, but it might change things." Ethan laughed lightly, shaking his head. "Always tinkering. You should have gone into business with me. You'd have been rich by now." Daniel didn't respond. He just tightened a bolt on the engine and muttered, "Rich isn't the same as fulfilled." Ethan didn't understand the weight of those words. He paid for the repair and left, never realizing that the device he had dismissed so easily would soon capture the attention of one of America's largest automotive companies. And when that happened, Daniel's quiet life was going to be turned upside down. Daniel's invention didn't stay a secret for long. One of his regular customers, Mark Sullivan, was a truck fleet owner who managed dozens of delivery vehicles across Ohio. He was constantly struggling with fuel costs, which ate away at his profits. After Daniel quietly fitted one of his trucks with the prototype, Mark noticed something shocking. His fuel consumption dropped by nearly a fifth over the course of a month. Mark couldn't believe it. He came storming into Daniel's garage one morning, waving a fuel logbook in the air. "Danny, do you realize what you've built here?" he exclaimed. Daniel, wiping grease off his hands, replied humbly, "Just a little device I've been working on. Still needs refining." Mark shook his head, almost laughing. "Refining? This thing could change the whole industry. You need to patent this. You need investors. Heck, you need a lawyer before someone steals the idea out from under you." The thought shook Daniel. He had been so focused on the mechanics that he hadn't considered the business side. That very evening, Mark introduced him to a patent attorney in Cleveland. Within weeks, Daniel filed the paperwork to protect his invention. For the first time in years, he felt like he was stepping into a future that belonged solely to him. News began to spread beyond the small town. Word of mouth reached an executive from Midwest Motors. a major automotive company headquartered in Detroit. They sent a representative to test Daniel's device. The results left the engineers stunned. Within days, Daniel was invited to present his invention at their headquarters. When Daniel walked into the gleaming glass towers of Midwest Motors, dressed in his only clean shirt and a borrowed blazer from a friend, he felt out of place. But once he began to explain his invention, his nervousness disappeared. He spoke with passion, with the quiet confidence of a man who had poured his soul into every bolt and sketch. The engineers listened intently. Executives whispered among themselves. Finally, one of the vice presidents leaned forward and said, "Mr. Carter, we want to buy your invention. Not just the prototype. We want the patent, the rights, everything. And we're willing to make you a wealthy man." Daniel froze. Wealth was never his goal, but with the money, he could expand his garage, build a proper workshop, and finally take care of his mother without worry. He asked for a day to think. That night, Daniel sat alone in the garage, staring at the device on his workbench. For years, he had been overlooked, pushed aside and underestimated even by his own brother. And yet here it was, the proof that his hands of gold had created something that could change the world. Ethan Carter had always believed he was untouchable. He moved through life with a silver tongue and a sharp mind for deals. But the tide had turned, and now every phone call brought bad news. "Your payment is overdue. The investors are pulling out. The property has been repossessed." Each word was like a hammer breaking down the empire he had built. The mansion that once echoed with laughter and clinking glasses now felt like a hollow shell. The shiny cars sat idle in the driveway, symbols of a success that was slipping through his fingers. At night, Ethan drank heavily, staring at financial papers spread across his marble kitchen counter. No matter how he twisted the numbers, the math didn't lie. He was broke. Pride had kept him from admitting it to anyone, but whispers were already spreading in town. The same people who once praised his brilliance now shook their heads and called him reckless. Meanwhile, Daniel's life was transforming. Midwest Motors announced their partnership with him, and newspapers called him the mechanic who changed the future of cars. Interviews, television appearances, and offers from other companies poured in. Yet Daniel remained the same humble man, still living in his small rented house, still spending hours in the garage. His mother watched him with pride, her health improving with the peace of knowing her eldest son was finally being recognized. One evening, Ethan drove back to that same garage. Only this time, it wasn't to mock his brother's tinkering. It was because he had nowhere else to turn. Daniel was tightening bolts on a new engine model when he heard the familiar sound of Ethan's SUV pulling up. The door opened and Ethan stepped out, not in his usual polished suit, but in worn jeans and a wrinkled shirt. His eyes were heavy, his shoulders slumped. For the first time in years, Daniel saw his younger brother not as the powerful businessman, but as a man broken by his own ambition. "Danny?" Ethan's voice cracked. He swallowed hard before continuing. "I've lost everything. The restaurants, the dealerships, even the house. The banks are after me. I don't know what to do anymore." Daniel wiped his hands on a rag and studied him quietly. He remembered all the times Ethan had belittled him, the way he had claimed the family property, leaving Daniel with nothing but his tools. Ethan's eyes filled with tears. "I was wrong, brother. I thought I was smarter than you, better than you. But look at me now, I have nothing. And you built something incredible. You deserve everything, Danny. I don't deserve your help, but I need your forgiveness." The silence between them stretched long. Daniel's heart wrestled with old wounds and the love that still lingered. Finally, he set the rag down and placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder. "You're still my brother," he said softly. "And no matter what happened, I'll never turn you away." Ethan's face crumpled as he broke down, years of pride and guilt melting into tears. Daniel pulled him into an embrace, a bond reforged in forgiveness. For the first time in years, the Carter brothers stood together, not as rivals but as family. The days that followed were unlike anything Ethan had ever experienced. For years he had been the one giving orders, making deals and standing in the spotlight. Now he sat quietly in Daniel's modest kitchen, drinking coffee from a chipped mug, trying to figure out who he was without the empire he had lost. Daniel never once rubbed his success in Ethan's face. Instead, he treated him the same way he always had, like a brother. He offered Ethan a place to stay until he could get back on his feet. At first, Ethan resisted, pride clawing at him. But eventually, humility won. One evening, as the two brothers sat outside the garage, Ethan finally asked the question that had been burning inside him. "Danny, how did you do it? How did you manage to build something so big when you had nothing?" Daniel looked at his hands. the same hands scarred from years of labor. Because I never gave up on the small things. While you were chasing big wins, I just kept working on what was in front of me. Every bolt, every sketch, every failure, it all added up. You were always smarter with people, Ethan. But I learned to be patient with problems. Ethan nodded slowly, realizing the truth in his brother's words. He had chased shortcuts while Daniel had built foundations. As weeks turned into months, Ethan began helping Daniel in the garage. At first it was awkward, his soft hands unused to hard labor. But Daniel guided him patiently, teaching him how engines worked, how to listen to the hum of a car and know its story. Ethan found a strange peace in it. For the first time in his life, he wasn't chasing money or power. He was simply learning side by side with the brother he had once betrayed. Meanwhile, Midwest Motors expanded their partnership with Daniel, opening a research division under his name. They offered him a seat on the board, but Daniel insisted on staying close to the garage where it all began. He wanted Ethan to be part of it too, not as a charity case but as a partner. People think strength is about what you own, Daniel told Ethan one night as they closed the garage. But real strength is about who you are when everything is taken away. You've got a second chance now. Don't waste it. Ethan smiled faintly for the first time in a long time. I won't, not this time. Together, the Carter brothers began building a new life. One founded not on greed or pride, but on trust, hard work, and forgiveness. Years later, when people spoke of the Carters, they didn't talk about Ethan's lost empire or Daniel's sudden fortune. They talked about two brothers who lost their way but found each other again. And in that reunion, they found something greater than wealth: family. Ethan had never lived a simple life. From the moment he turned 18, he had been surrounded by luxury, fancy cars, high-end parties, and friends who only stuck around as long as his wallet was full. But now, as he sat on a worn-out stool in Daniel's garage, wiping grease from his hands after a long day, he felt something strange: peace. At first, the work had been humiliating. His soft palms blistered, his back ached, and he couldn't even change a tire without Daniel's guidance. But Daniel never mocked him, never reminded him of the past. Instead, he patiently taught him, step by step, as though Ethan were just another apprentice. Slowly, Ethan began to appreciate the rhythm of honest labor. One afternoon, as they fixed up an old Dodge pickup, Ethan asked, "Danny, do you ever resent me for what I did with the property, for how I treated you?" Daniel looked up from the engine, his eyes calm. "I did for a long time, I won't lie. But carrying resentment is like carrying a heavy wrench in your pocket. You only weigh yourself down. When I forgave you, I let go of that weight, and now I'm free." Those words sank deep into Ethan's heart. He realized how much time he had wasted chasing pride and power, while his brother had quietly built something lasting. As weeks passed, Ethan began contributing ideas, not about cars, but about people. He suggested ways to market Daniel's invention, how to approach clients, how to turn the garage into more than just a repair shop. Daniel, who had always focused on the mechanical side, listened carefully. For the first time, the brothers' strengths complemented each other. Meanwhile, the world outside took notice. Journalists visited the garage to interview Daniel, but they couldn't help noticing the quiet, humbled figure of Ethan working beside him. Rumors spread. The Carter brothers were back together, not as rivals, but as partners. One evening, Midwest Motors invited Daniel to a formal gala in Detroit to honor his achievements. Daniel agreed to attend, on one condition: Ethan would come too. Ethan hesitated, embarrassed by his fall from grace, but Daniel insisted. At the gala, as businessmen and politicians applauded Daniel, Ethan stood in the background, nervous and out of place. But when Daniel gave his speech, he turned toward his brother and said, "This success isn't mine alone. I may have built the device, but my brother taught me something more valuable than invention. He taught me forgiveness. Without him, I wouldn't be standing here today." The room erupted in applause. Ethan's eyes filled with tears, his heart swelling with a mixture of shame and pride. For the first time in years, he wasn't the clever businessman or the failed king. He was simply Ethan Carter, Daniel's brother, and that, he realized, was more valuable than all the wealth he had lost. After the gala in Detroit, things began to change for the Carter brothers. For years, their lives had run on opposite tracks, Ethan chasing wealth with reckless ambition, Daniel working humbly in his garage. But now, for the first time since their father's death, they were moving in the same direction. Daniel had plenty of offers from Midwest Motors, big offices, research teams, and high-paying contracts. But his heart still belonged to the garage. It was where he felt most alive, where ideas were born. Still, He knew the garage alone wasn't enough to carry the dream forward. That's where Ethan came in. One morning, as they sipped coffee on the porch of Daniel's small house, Ethan said quietly, "Danny, I know I've failed in the past, but I've learned my lesson. If you'll let me, I want to help you grow this, not as a businessman trying to take over, but as your partner, as your brother." Daniel studied him for a moment, then smiled. "I was hoping you'd say that." Within weeks, they transformed Daniel's small garage into a company. The sign above the shop now read, Carter Innovations. Ethan took charge of handling clients, contracts, and finances, while Daniel focused on engineering and design. Together, they were unstoppable. The first big step was expanding the fuel-saving device. Daniel worked on refining it for trucks, buses, and even farming equipment. Ethan, using his charm and business skills, reached out to companies across the Midwest. For the first time, Daniel's invention was not just a product, it was becoming a movement. The town that once pitied Daniel for his simple life now celebrated him. Newspapers called him the hometown hero, and Ethan was no longer seen as the fallen star, but as the man who stood beside his brother, rebuilding with humility. But success didn't erase the memories of the past. One evening, as they worked late in the garage, Ethan paused and said, "Danny, do you ever think about Dad? About what he would say if he saw us now?" Daniel looked up from the workbench, his eyes soft. "I think he'd be proud, not because of the money or the invention, but because we finally found our way back to each other." Ethan nodded, his throat tightening. For years, he had thought success meant outshining everyone else. But now he understood. It meant standing beside the people who mattered most. Months later, Carter Innovations received a massive contract to supply devices nationwide. Reporters asked Daniel how he felt about becoming a millionaire inventor. Daniel only smiled and said, "I feel like a mechanic who got lucky." Then, turning to Ethan, he added, "And a brother who finally found his way home." For the first time in decades, the Carter family legacy was no longer about land or money. It was about unity, forgiveness, and a dream they had built together. Jonathan's invention had now become a household name across the country. Every automobile magazine wrote about it. Every news channel covered his story, how a struggling mechanic had changed the future of fuel efficiency. Investors lined up, wanting a share of his success. But Jonathan remained humble, carefully choosing only those who truly believed in innovation, rather than greed. Meanwhile, Michael's world was collapsing. The younger brother who once lived in luxury was drowning in debt. His risky business ventures failed one after another, and the friends who once surrounded him for his wealth began to disappear. He was left alone, burdened by loans, creditors knocking at his door, and a reputation in ruins. Nights were sleepless, and days were filled with regret. One morning, after receiving yet another notice from the bank, Michael sat at his desk staring blankly at the papers. For the first time in years, he thought about his elder brother, the same brother he had cheated, insulted, and driven away. He remembered Jonathan's quiet patience, his hard work in the garage, and how he never once fought back for what was rightfully his. Shame washed over him. Tears fell silently as he whispered, "I destroyed my own brother, and now I have destroyed myself." Swallowing his pride, Michael decided to visit Jonathan. He drove a worn-out car to the company's headquarters, a tall glass building shining under the morning sun. As he walked into the lobby, he felt small, almost invisible, compared to the grand success of his brother. Employees greeted him politely, not knowing who he was, and directed him to Jonathan's office. When Michael entered, Jonathan was reviewing some designs with his engineers. The moment his eyes fell on his younger brother, he froze. Years of distance, betrayal, and pain seemed to hang heavy in the air. Michael, unable to hold back his emotions, fell to his knees right there in the office. "Jonathan," he said with a trembling voice, "I don't deserve to be here. I took everything from you, every dollar, every property, every right you had. And yet, you built something greater than I could ever imagine. I have lost everything, and I came here not for money but for forgiveness." The room went silent. Jonathan's employees discreetly stepped out, leaving the two brothers alone. Jonathan slowly stood, his eyes fixed on Michael. Years of hardship flashed before him, the nights in the garage, the loneliness, the humiliation, and yet deep inside there was no hatred left. Jonathan walked over, placed his hands on his younger brother's shoulders, and said softly, "Michael, you are my brother. Wealth and property can be taken, but blood cannot be erased. I forgave you a long time ago." Michael broke down, sobbing uncontrollably. In that moment, he realized that his brother's heart was far richer than any fortune he had ever stolen. Michael wiped his tears, still kneeling on the floor, unable to believe what he had just heard. His elder brother, despite years of betrayal, had chosen forgiveness over resentment. Jonathan reached down, lifted him gently, and guided him to a chair. "Michael," Jonathan said with calm dignity, "life taught me that bitterness only poisons the one who carries it. I chose to let go of the past, and that's why I was able to build this future. If you're ready, we can rebuild our bond as brothers." Michael lowered his head, ashamed but deeply moved. "I don't deserve your kindness, Jonathan. I spent years thinking I was smarter, better, destined for success. But I see now it was your patience, your hard work, your honesty that gave you true strength. I was blinded by greed." Jonathan smiled faintly. "Then maybe it's time you learned what real success is. It isn't the money or the property. It's the peace you carry in your heart." From that day forward, the two brothers slowly began to repair their broken relationship. Jonathan introduced Michael to his team, not as an outcast, but as family. Though Michael had no wealth left, Jonathan gave him a role in the company, not out of pity, but to give him a chance to rebuild his life with dignity. Michael accepted with humility, vowing never to repeat the mistakes of his past. In the months that followed, the brothers worked side by side. Michael brought in his business experience. Though scarred by failure, it still carried valuable lessons. Jonathan, on the other hand, continued to lead with vision and compassion. Together, they grew the company into a symbol of innovation and brotherhood. One evening, as the sun set behind the city skyline, the two brothers sat on the balcony of Jonathan's home, sipping coffee in silence. Finally, Michael spoke. "You know, Jonathan, I thought I had everything when I took the property, but it feels like I gained the world only now, when I gained my brother back." Jonathan placed a hand on his shoulder, his eyes warm with affection. "And I thought I had lost my family forever. But today, I realize forgiveness can bring back more than money ever could." The silence that followed was not heavy anymore. It was peaceful, filled with the quiet bond of two men who had walked through betrayal, struggle, and pain only to find love waiting at the end. Their story became more than just a tale of success and failure. It became a lesson for those around them, a reminder that greed destroys, but forgiveness heals. And in the heart of two brothers who had once been torn apart, a new chapter began, one built on unity, trust, and unshakable love.